Hello Learning Bird, it's good to see you again. Today's trilogy of videos is about George Orwell's 1984, and in this first video I will be looking at some of the characters in the novel. Now I'll try to get through as many as possible in as short a time as possible, but know that this is only the starting point for you to get you into deeper analysis of the characters. So, first off we have Winston Smith, who is of course the protagonist of the novel. Now personally, from my reading, I thought a really brilliant quote to sum up Winston's character was, "He was a lonely ghost uttering a truth that nobody would ever hear." I think this captures him beautifully because obviously from the start of the novel, Winston is feeling oppressed by Big Brother, and he has difficulty finding an outlet for his subversive thoughts against the party. Throughout the text, his thoughts against the party build and build, but his attempts to thwart the party ultimately come to nothing because he is captured, tortured, and even converted by the end of the novel. Now, he's alone in the sense that nobody understands the mechanics of the party the way he does, and nobody challenges the social constructs the way he does. We can see through his diary writing that Winston is quite pensive. He thinks quite philosophically about the implications of the party and its effect on life, humanity, even sanity. And it's through his character that the author Orwell is able to fully explore the themes of the novel. Now, the main crux about Winston's character is that he knows there is no hope for himself, and he even admits this during the course of his torture. He knows that real, genuine hope has been abolished and been made impossible in the world in which he lives, and so he gives himself false hope. Loving Julia, for example, renting the apartment above Mr. Charrington's shop, writing in a diary, these are all things that give him hope when he knows that it's not real hope. They don't mean anything because he always knows that he's going to get caught. And it's through his character that we see the futility of man. When Winston's being tortured by O'Brien, O'Brien calls him the last man. He's the last speck of humanity, and he is broken down physically and mentally, and he is utterly, ultimately converted. His character portrays that utter hopelessness that is rife in that world, and he portrays how senseless rebellion is. Next we have Julia, who we didn't know by name until a fair way into the text. She becomes Winston's lover after sneaking him a note that says, "I love you," and she's quite different to Winston in that she's sensual, pragmatic, and she's not as paranoid as Winston is. Though she never seems that keen on joining the Brotherhood with Winston, she appears to be more content with her minor rebellions against the party, and this is exemplified when she tells Winston that she slept with a bunch of party members, and she says she does it scores of times. Slut! Anyway, she mostly focuses on pleasure-seeking, that is, sex, slut, while not being caught by the party. And besides those mutual traits that she and Winston share, they're almost completely different in every other way. And so she provides contrast to him. I would imagine that the purpose of her character in the text is to, yes, provide contrast to Winston, but also to show that although people may be different, that very same individuality is exactly what's stripped away by the party. And this is evident at the end of the text when we see Winston and Julia meeting again for the first time after they've been tortured. They admit that they betrayed each other, they both become lifeless, soulless, always kind of afraid, and they're newly converted. So she's an example of how every type of individuality can be broken down by Big Brother in the same way. And so they'd be reduced to the same baser life form, which is that of a mindless servant, a sheep, a follower. Next we have O'Brien. Now this guy's the physical antagonist of the story, and at the start of the novel Winston likens him to an 18th century nobleman, which of course we learn to be erroneous when he finds out that O'Brien in fact works for the party and becomes Winston's torturer. Now for all intents and purposes, O'Brien is the mouthpiece for the party, and it's through him, during Winston's torture, that we hear, from more or less the source, the justifications behind the party's conduct. Now, O'Brien provides us with the party's views on power, on sanity, on all of those ideas like doublethink and reality control. By the end of the novel, though, we learn that he's the furthest thing from a nobleman. He's a brute, he's barbaric, he's actually kind of ruthless. He is the perfect manifestation in the text of the party's oppressive ideals, and even though they're oppressive, we see them to be the usurper. The interesting thing about O'Brien's character is that from the start, we believe him to be part of the Brotherhood because Winston suspects this. But when we learn that he has been deceiving Winston, everything we've thought about him is subverted, and we don't really know anything about his character at all. It seems that as the text goes on, more and more questions are raised about his character, more than the questions that are answered. For example, when Winston first sees him in the prison, he asks him, "Oh, did they get you?" or "They got you?" And he says they got me long ago. And this vague statement can make us think that maybe he too was rebellious at one point and then converted. It's a very vague response that tells us nothing concrete about him, and from that point on it seems like he only generates more and more ambiguity. Another example is when he says Winston will never know whether or not there's a brotherhood, or if it's just a construct made by the party in order to identify and capture rebellious citizens. But anyway, I could talk about him forever and ever, so I'll just stop it there. I'll try to get through the next character as quick as I can. We have Big Brother, which is a manifestation of the party, the figurehead. He's actually more of a symbol than he is a character. But at the start of the text, Winston looks at the poster of Big Brother and describes him as ruggedly handsome and identifies him as the invincible, fearless protector. So at the start of the novel, that's the impression we get of him, that he's actually an ideal leader. But then, of course, later on, we learn that he's anything but. At the end of the text, this happens. 40 years it had taken him to learn what kind of smile was hidden beneath a dark mustache. Oh, cruel, needless misunderstanding. Oh, stubborn, self-willed exile from the loving breast. Now, I've been thinking about those two ideas, the needless misunderstanding and the self-willed exile from the loving breast. And if I had to guess, I'd say that the first statement implies that that idea of misunderstanding, the feud between Winston and the party, is needless. You know, there need be no distinction between them anymore because Winston is happily converted. Or it could be a nod to the idea that when the party's ideals are misunderstood, the party then becomes cruel to the individuals that misunderstand them and thus fail to oblige by them. The second statement is a little clearer, self-willed exile from the loving breast, which I think implies that it's one's own decision to part with their parents, to part with their humanity and their sentimentality, which we know to be the case in the novel. There's this illusion that it's the individual's choice, but we know that it's the party making that choice for them. Think of how children are turned against their parents. They're being exiled from the loving breast that feeds them. You know, they're being converted right from the start. And that is one of the many things that Big Brother represents. Of course, these are just interpretations. There are plenty more you can make, but it's worth thinking about what you might have thought of it. You can look at some stuff online, but I think it's better to have your own interpretation because I think there's something there. Now, other characters include Emmanuel Goldstein, who is thought of as the primal traitor or the first defiler of the party. He's broadcasted during Hate Week, and his character, whether or not he's even real, he gives the population somewhere to direct their hate. Now, the hate that the population should be feeling for Big Brother is then transferred to Goldstein, which is why I imagine the party is utilizing him. There's Mr. and Mrs. Parsons, Winston's neighbors. Now we know that Mr. Parson is also imprisoned with Winston because he's turned in by his daughter. And again, his character shows that idea that children are turned against their parents. He shows that idea, he shows that decline of family relations, the breakdown of humanity and sentimentality. There's Winston's parents and his little sister who always come to him in dreams and visions, and he believes he is responsible for killing them. They represent his guilt in a way, and perhaps even a catalyst for his actions and his thoughts against the party. There's Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, which are three figures that were convicted and converted by the party. Winston had proof that they were innocent at one point, but in his torture he is cured of that idea. They're an example of what happens to rebels of the party. They are representations of how genuine truth can be surmounted by the reality control of the party. They're a representation of how the truth can be subjugated by the power of the party. But anyway, that's actually my time for today. I'll just give you some names of some of the other characters that might be worth looking into. There's Tillotson and Withers, which is some of Winston's work colleagues. There's Ogilvy and Syme. There's Catherine, which is Winston's wife. There's Mr. Charrington, which is the shop owner. There's Ampleforth. There's Oliver Cromwell. And there's also that nameless woman in the prison who says that she could be Winston's mother. But all of these characters you can also look into, because depending on your interpretation, they can have quite a significant effect on the story and significant meaning. I hope that that was a good starting point for you guys. Please rate this video if you found it helpful, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.